Welcome to the prophecy study today. We have been talking about Matthew 24, and we're going to pick up in Matthew 24. And the place that we're going to be picking up, I think it's verse 15 or 16, there's a break in the prophecy that Jesus is talking about. And he starts with one set of prophecies before the rapture. And then he breaks to the midpoint of the tribulation, and that's where we're going to pick up today. We're going to talk about the midpoint of the tribulation. So let's just do a little bit of recap so you can kind of follow where we are on the scheme of the end time timeline. So first of all, the church is going to be raptured. I'm not going to go into a lot of this because we've covered it quite a bit already. But the rapture is going to take the church out of the world. The people that are Christians will be leaving. Obviously, the Christians have the Holy Spirit, so when the Christians get taken out, the Holy Spirit will in large part be taken out of the world as well. Right after the rapture, soon after the rapture, we don't know if there's a break, but sometime after the rapture, there'll be a peace decree signed between Israel and Arab nations. That will begin the first half of the tribulation. The first 3.5 years of tribulation to the midpoint is relatively peaceful because, again, the peace treaty is going to be signed. The Jews are going to start to build a temple. They actually will get the temple built during the first 3.5 years, and everything will go smoothly for the first 3.5 years. And then what we're going to talk about today is going to happen at the midpoint. We'll look at those details in a second. And then the last half of the tribulation period is sometimes known as the Great Tribulation period, and that will be 3.5 years. But before we continue in Matthew 24, I want to look at some scriptures that we've already looked at in Daniel. We've already looked at these, so I'll recap just some highlights as it pertains to the midpoint of the tribulation. We'll look ahead to Revelation, so I'll kind of look at where these things were prophesied in Revelation, but understand that when we get to Revelation, we'll be covering these things again. And then Thessalonians as well, we will talk about what Paul revealed in Thessalonians. So let's look at the Old Testament first with Daniel. So, and remember, as I'm reading this picture, this is the halfway point of the tribulation. He will confirm, when it says he, that's talking about the Antichrist, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Daniel 11:31, so that's talking about the Antichrist is going to be revealed halfway through. He's going to set up probably an idol in the temple that's going to cause the abomination of desolation. He continues on in 11:31. His armed forces will rise up to desecrate the temple fortress and will abolish the daily sacrifice. So this is how we know that the temple is going to be rebuilt, because that's the only place the Jews can offer sacrifices. No sacrifices are offered today in Israel or in the Jewish nation because there is no temple. So here we know that the temple will have been built because sacrifices had been offered, because it says that the Antichrist is going to abolish the daily sacrifice. Then they will set up the abomination that causes desolation. Most likely, again, this is an idol or something like that. Daniel 12:11, from the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished, as it refers back here to 11:31. From that time, the daily sacrifice is abolished, and the abomination that causes desolation is set up. And from there, it's going to be 1,290 days. Just a quick check on the math, because we have talked about this. The last 3.5 years is 1,260 days. Jewish people have a 360-day calendar, so that will be 1,260 days. We'll look at the other 30 days more a little bit later, but understand the way that scholars understand this is in between the Battle of Armageddon and the beginning of the millennium, it's going to take 30 days to set up the new government because we'll be ruling and reigning with Christ. I have no experience on ruling and reigning, so they're going to have to give me a crash course for 30 days on how to do it. So many people believe that's what that 30 days is, taking time to get all this stuff set up. So then we go on to 2 Thessalonians. Let me give you a quick summary of Thessalonians. So Paul established the church in Thessalonica, and then after he established the church, he moved on to other mission fields, and he had pastors there, but then false teachers came in, and what they started doing is teaching the people that they had already missed the rapture. So the Thessalonians were kind of confused about this, and so Paul had heard about the confusion. So Paul wrote the letter to the Thessalonians saying that, no, you haven't missed the rapture, and so that's where we pick up here. Paul says, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered to him, that's the rapture, the gathered to him. People will try to tell you that the word rapture is not in the New Testament, and right, but neither is the word love in the New Testament. Why do I say that? Because it's not love, it's eros, or it's agape. It's the Greek word for love. So love is not there, but the Greek word for it is. So if you say, yes, rapture is not there, that's true. But the Greek word is gathered to him, raptizo. So that is the word there. So it actually, rapture is in the New Testament. It's just not given the English determination. So it's called transliterated. They take the word rapture and they just transliterate a little bit to call it the rapture. So like the gathered to him it's like raptizo or something like that. Anyway, so Paul says, we ask you, brothers and sisters, not to become easily unsettled or alarmed by the teaching allegedly from us. So the false teachers were saying, oh, the apostles taught this. No, they didn't. So Paul said, don't be alarmed for them saying that it comes from us, whether by a prophecy or by word of mouth or by letter asserting that the day of the Lord has already come. He says it has not happened. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. He'll be revealed 3.5 years in. He has not been revealed right now. We don't know who the Antichrist is. So you can't have missed the rapture because the Antichrist is going to be revealed after the rapture. The man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worship. That's what he's doing in the temple during the tribulation period, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, there's the temple again, proclaiming himself to be God. So here basically Paul, and I don't want to put words in Paul's mouth, but Paul is basically saying, remember what Daniel was talking about? Well, here's when it's going to happen. Don't listen to these people that say you already missed it, because look what Daniel said. Daniel said the Antichrist will be revealed halfway through. And so that's what Paul's reminding him. The Thessalonians had the scriptures. They had the Old Testament. That is called the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Old Testament written in Greek. The people in Thessalonica spoke Greek. So they didn't have to know Hebrew. As a matter of fact, most of the Hebrews in these days didn't know Hebrew. Most Hebrews spoke Greek. So that's why the 70 scholars took the Hebrew Old Testament and translated it into Greek. And so that's what Paul is reminding. So they had this Bible, if you will. Of course, it was on scrolls, and it wasn't all collected in one place, but they had the scrolls of Daniel at this time. We know this from the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found. So he's kind of reminding them no, you haven't missed it, because here are some telltale signs and we haven't seen those things.
Is the lawless one?
That's
the
Antichrist, yeah. And so now let's look forward to Revelation. Obviously, Revelation was written after Thessalonians. So now in Revelation, the scene taking place that John is relaying, he's transported into the future. He was transported by Christ into the future and told what to write down. So when John is writing the book of Revelation, he's writing things future, with the exception of the letters to the seven churches. That was current. But after chapter 5 or somewhere around there, after he stops talking about the 7 letters to the church, from there on everything is future. And obviously you can see this is chapter 13, so John is talking in the future. And then he says, then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth, and we'll talk more about the beast and why it's coming out of the earth and so forth when we get to Revelation. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. Okay, now picking up in verse 12, it exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast. So the first beast is the Antichrist. The second beast coming up is the false prophet. And then you have the dragon. So just like there is a holy trinity, there is an unholy trinity: the dragon, the false prophet, and the beast. And so remember that Satan can't create anything. All he can do is mimic or copy stuff that God has made. So the devil looked at the Trinity, and he said, hey, I like that. That's a pretty good idea, God. I think I'll copy that. And so that's where you get the false prophet and the Antichrist. So the false prophet is going to be giving glory, as it will, false glory, to the first beast, and that's the Antichrist. And he made the earth and its inhabitants to worship the first beast, whose fatal flaw had been healed. And again, we'll look at the fatal flaw thing in the future when we get to Revelation. But notice that here again, they're worshiping the Antichrist in the temple, and that's going on. So here, Revelation is talking about that worship of the Antichrist in the temple. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Again, another copy of what God had done in the past through the prophets, Elijah and so forth. Because of it, the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth, because they're going to say, we've seen this before, and these great miracles came from God, because they did when it was the prophets of God or the apostles had done some certain miracles and signs. And so here again is the Antichrist making those signs. So it deceived the inhabitants. It ordered them to set up an image. Here we are again. So now we've seen it in Daniel, we've seen it in Thessalonians, and now we're seeing it again in Revelation. They're setting, and we've seen it in Matthew, they're setting up an idol, set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And again, we'll talk about that. So what I really want you to see by all these scriptures is this is the halfway point of the tribulation, when the Antichrist is going to be revealed and he's going to make people worship him. And then now it's really going to start. So now we're going to head into the second half. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. So now that we've seen Daniel, Thessalonians, and Revelation, now let's go back to Matthew 24, because 15 and before, what we've already looked at was the first 3.5 years. So now what I'm introducing to you is, now we're at the halfway point of the tribulation, and now we're heading into the second half. So now we're picking up in Matthew 24, starting in verse 16, and the things that Jesus is telling us concerns the second half of the tribulation. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Remember, up to this point, the Jews were living in Jerusalem. They were allowed to live there, to make sacrifices. They coexisted with the Arabs and the Muslims and everybody else that was there in Jerusalem. So they were allowed to live there, and there was relatively peace. But now the peace is, once the Antichrist is revealed, the peace is done. So now you're seeing the Jews flee. Let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. Here's a difference between here and the rapture. When the rapture comes, when Christ comes and calls for his church, there's nothing we need to see before that happens. He could come in the twinkling of an eye. He could come right now. But now, once the Antichrist reveals himself, the Jews that were living then and had maybe remembered things that maybe we as Christians told them. And maybe that's how they know. Maybe they're able to search onto the internet, look at books that we've left them and told them about, and maybe they're starting to see some of these things that we told them was going to happen, and now they're starting to see it. So these people, when they see the Antichrist for who he is, they know they're in real trouble, and so they are out of there. They are taken off out of Jerusalem. So let no one on the housetop go down to take anything out of the house, because it's going to go fast from now on. Let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it'll be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Obviously, that's not easy time to flee. So when that happens and you get word, don't go back. Because that is when he is going to be pouring out his wrath. The beast is going to be very upset, and you do not want to be a Jew in Jerusalem in these times.
But the beast is a man? He's a man?
Yes. He's the Antichrist. So he's a man. Empowered by the dragon, which is Satan. So like a demon. Demons today get their power from Satan. But all they can do is copy what God has given. But yes, he'll be a man. But remember, and again, I don't want to get into a lot of this right now, but remember it said that he had a wound that was healed, and they thought he was dead, and now he's alive. So that in and of itself is a copy of the resurrection. So something, and the scripture doesn't talk a lot about it, although we'll look at some clues a little bit later. But and that is the greatest miracle ever in Christianity, is the resurrection. So obviously he's going to try to mimic that too. He's not going to be satisfied with just miracles and fire from heaven. And so the one who had the wound that was healed, he's not really going to be dead. They cannot do miracles. Antichrist, the false prophet, the beast, the demons, none of them can actually do a miracle. All they can do is make it look like a miracle. And that's what they're going to make this person look like he came back from the dead, when it's going to be whatever, sleight of hand. So let no one in the field go back to get their cloak. How dreadful it'll be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath. So again, midpoint of the tribulation. Jerusalem is now going to be the focus of the wrath. That is where the Antichrist is going to be. Jerusalem is the holy city. Jerusalem is God's chosen city. And that is anything that is special to God is going to receive extra wrath from the Antichrist, including his city of Jerusalem. Now, what we're about to start to get into, if you remember when we looked at Ezekiel 38, and way back in the lands of Gog and Magog, and Ethiopia it mentions, and some of the other, Persia it mentions, which is Iran. Back when we studied Ezekiel 38, and we were looking a lot at Ukraine, I won't go into all that right now, but if you remember that battle, when Russia was coming down through Ukraine, and then the other nations around Israel are all going to descend upon Jerusalem. And so that's when this is happening, is the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, remember it says, pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, because if the Muslims see people fleeing on the Sabbath, they know that something big is happening, because Jews follow law, and Jews are not allowed to travel so far from their home. They're not allowed to carry anything with them. So when they see, you're taking off, and that could be, again, while it says don't go back for your cloak, don't take anything with you, because these are going to be signs, and all the Muslims are going to know something's up. And remember, they don't have all the prophecies that the Jews do. And so, but one thing that they will know is that the Jews don't do certain things on the Sabbath, and now they're doing them. So something must be up. So again, that's going to be kind of clues. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. So this scripture is specifically New Testament, because when you saw bad things happen in the Old Testament, it never said there were, like when Noah and the ark, it might say the world had never seen anything like this. But in the Old Testament, it doesn't ever say, and you'll never see it again. Because the Old Testament knew, yes, you will, but now this is the end of the time. And so this great tribulation, it's true, you will never see anything like this happening again. It's going to take place in 3.5 years. So the great distress. Jeremiah 30, I love this. Jeremiah 30, 4 through 7 is known as the time of Jacob's trouble, not Abraham or Isaac, because there's no distress for the Arabs. Okay, so if you know your history, Abraham is not only the father of the Jews, but he's also the father of the Arabs. And so is Isaac. And then they broke off after that. Jacob and Esau, that's where they split. And Jacob was the promised line. Those are the ones that became Jews. And so you can't call it Abraham's trouble, because all of Abraham, all his descendants are not having trouble. You can't say it's Isaac's trouble, because not all of Isaac's descendants are going to have trouble. So they've narrowed it down to Jacob's trouble. That's why in Jeremiah it says this is the time of Jacob's, how awful that day will be. No other day will be like it. So remember, from back up here, unequaled, going forward, and here Jeremiah is saying nothing will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob. So not Isaac, not Abraham, because the Arabs are not in trouble at this point, because they're the ones that are doing the troubling of the Jews, which is Jacob's people, not Esau's.
Well, it's the Antichrist, not the Arabs, causing trouble.
Right, but the Antichrist is not going to cause trouble for the Arabs, because he has no problem with the Arabs. They're not God's people. He only has trouble with the Jews. And the Jews are descended from Jacob, not his brother or necessarily his father or grandfather. Indirectly, yes. But he had to go down, Jeremiah had to go down to Jacob before they're specifically Jews. All of Jacob's children, the 12 tribes of Jacob, are the Jews. Jacob's name was Israel. Okay, so Israel and the 12 tribes, so that's where it broke off in Jacob. So that's why Jeremiah calls it the time of Jacob's trouble, because that doesn't go back to Abraham or Isaac. So in other words, Jeremiah specifically was looking forward to these days, and especially no other will be like it. So now it's that you don't see in the Old Testament, unless he's talking about the end, very end of times, like the last 3.5 years. Verse 22, this is again of Matthew 24. So, and again talking about second half of the tribulation. Jesus says, if those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Well, first of all, no Jews would be survived because they were in the minority. They're being attacked by everybody. So had the final 3.5 years not been cut short, there'd be no Jews alive. And then Jesus is coming back on the white horse, and he's going to wipe out the enemies, and so there would be none of them left. Well, there won't be any of them left. But so, the Arabs would kill, the Muslims would kill all the Jews, and then Christ would kill all the Muslims, and there'd be nobody left. So they have to shorten those days. There has to be a time when God says, enough, I'm coming. So this refers to the second 3.5 years. Revelation 13:5, talking about the same thing. Now we're back to Revelation, looking back at Matthew. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months, or 1,260 days. So the beast was given exercise its authority for 42 months. So it's saying he's going to get his way, and he's going to be fighting, and he's going to be killing people for 42 months. And then what's going to happen at the end of the 42 months? Why is that going to end? Because that's the Battle of Armageddon. That's when Christ comes back on the horse. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name. This goes back to, this is still Revelation 13. Verse 6, it opened its mouth to blaspheme God and to slander his name and his dwelling place and all those who live in heaven. So this is the Antichrist again, slandering God. It was given power to wage war against God's people and to conquer them. This is Revelation. This is Antichrist in the second 3.5 years, and he's waging war against God's people and conquering them. And it was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. So again, Antichrist has supreme authority as it was given authority. So Satan can't come up with this authority on his own. He can't just do it because he wants to. God is allowing it to happen because this is the judgment. And unfortunately, judgment has to happen. It's not pretty, but it is still, God is sovereign. God decides all things, and when God decides something, it's going to happen, and nothing can happen without God allowing it, either, depending on what it is, either causing it or at least allowing it. And so now he's allowing the Antichrist, and many times we look in the Old Testament, and when the Jews failed and they got away from God and they started worshiping idols and stuff like that, God used many nations to conquer Israel, send them into captivity, break down their walls, carry away their people, do this, do that, whatever. God has given them authority to do that. But God has always had, and he's always left a what?
Remnant.
A remnant, okay? So he's never going to wipe out his people. He is always going to have those that are faithful. And even though we don't fit in, Christians don't fit in on the true concept of the remnant, we're still in that vein, in that we are, I'm not saying that the church has taken Israel's place, but we are now, we're going to make it. There are martyrs. There are people that have given their life for Christ. There are still martyrs right now around the world that are giving their life because they've written for Christ, and God is always going to save some of us.
But that group of people is anybody who lived that did not go in the rapture, but all the nations of people who are left at this point still.
Right, and
not just Muslims or Jews, it's everybody.
Right, but most of them nations are not going to be Satan still had authority over those nations, but I think when we looked back at Ezekiel, not all of them are waging war in Jerusalem. Argentina is not waging war. Peru is not waging war. Laos or Cambodia are not waging war. It's mostly those nations that they told us about in 38. So all will be under condemnation, and all are going to come under the authority of the Antichrist, but all are not going to be punished like them. But if they're unbelievers, they're still not going to be saved. Continuing on in Revelation 13, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, and so there you go. There's all inhabitants, so they may not be taking up arms against Jerusalem, but the beast is taking over the world, and the people in Chile or Canada or Luxembourg, all these other countries, it says right here that they're going to be worshiping the beast. So
the mark of the beast.
They're going to be taking the mark of the beast. They're going to have to do that. So they've made their choice. All whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Then just to add to it, we've been looking at Matthew, but Luke had a few tidbits that Matthew did not. So Luke 21, 25, and 26 says, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars on the, again, second 3.5 years of the tribulation. There'll be signs in the sun, moon, and stars on the earth. Nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on in the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. There's a pretty good sized portion of the people in the world that don't know anything about Jews, Muslims, or anything else. They're just minding their business, farming, living in the jungle, doing whatever they're doing. But everybody's gonna see these signs, and somewhere along the line with a common economy, they're gonna have to have at some point worship the beast to take the mark and say, yeah, whatever, as long as I can buy food or whatever. So again, it's talking about the nations. There'll be signs in the sun, the moon, and stars. Now we could speculate, and I've heard people speculate and say, okay, atomic bombs are going to be dropped. When the atomic bombs are going to be dropped, that's going to kick up such fire and smoke and dust that you're not going to be able to see the sun, the moon, and the stars. Every now and then we have great wildfires out west, and when you see the moon, sometimes it looks reddish because of the smoke and the stuff in the air. So stuff that's going on the earth, because obviously the sun, moon, and stars are out there, and we have to look through the atmosphere to see them. So if stuff happens in the atmosphere, it looks like things are happening in the sun and the moon, but they're actually happening in our atmosphere, but it makes the moon look red or some other thing. So, but again, that's speculation. I'm speculating on what these things are going to do. Many people have said that if you look at the book of Revelation and like a great mountain of fire coming out of the sky, could be atomic bombs, could be conventional bombs, anything like that. But again, that's speculating. At that time, if anyone says to you, and again, last 3.5 years, look, and this is back in Matthew, at that time, if anyone says to you, so these are the words of Jesus, look, here is the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe it, for false messiahs and false prophets are going to appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So these are going to be demons. These are going to be people that are empowered by Satan. And again, they're going to be the false messiahs. A while back, we talked about Calvinism and the 5 points of Calvinism, and they use the word tulip, T-U-L-I-P, and the I in tulip is a thing called irresistible grace. And when you're talking about election, you're saying if people have been elected, then they're going to be elected, they're going to be saved. So when you're talking about here, false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. This looks like it's saying And to me, it looks like it's saying, it's not possible to deceive the elect. The people who are elect are the people that God has written their name in the book of life, and they have been chosen, they have been elected, and so it's not possible to fool them. But if it were, that's how great the wonders are. If it were possible, they could be deceived. But Calvin and Irresistible Grace said it's not possible. God has saved those people and written their name in the book of life. For as lightning comes from the east is visible even to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. So what do we know this as? The coming of the Son of Man. Every eye will see him. This is the second coming. Okay, when he comes, the second coming, all will know it. When he comes the first time, the rapture, I don't think people are going to see him. Unbelievers. I don't think unbelievers are going to see him. They're going to be confused and say, like, what happened? My buddy was right here and now he's not here. They're not going to see Jesus coming down, ascending, through the clouds, the unsaved, and then calling their people up. So, but here at his second coming, so again, we're talking Matthew 24, and again, this too shows you this is not the rapture. This is the second coming. And I do believe that when the second coming comes, I believe that's where every eye will see, and they will know they missed it. It's too late at that point. Now, all indications tells me that, here comes Jesus, whoop, I made a mistake. Yes, I do believe in you. I don't know. Whether you can do it that quick and on that second, I don't know, but I don't want to take that chance. So, but everybody will see it. Isaiah 13, 1 through 13, we know because Jesus tells us that Babylon is the future wicked government of Antichrist. So, how did I get that in there? Babylon, so Isaiah uses the name Babylon in speaking about false governments, and quite often in general a statement of the enemy of the Lord. Immediately after the distress, back in Matthew 24, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and heavenly bodies will be shaken, kind of like what we speculated about before, maybe bombs or something. God in the heavens has had enough, because now, look, we're talking about heavenly bodies. Pretty much everything up to this, earthquakes, the oceans roaring, things like that. Until this tribulation period, a lot of this was earthly signs, and now we're talking about heavenly bodies being shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming. They're going to mourn because they missed it. On the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So that's his second coming. And then verse 31, and he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one ends of the earth to the other. And again, because we're talking remember, there are going to be people saved in the tribulation. So this is like the rapture, but it's at the end of the time. So it's the people that believed on him during the tribulation period. He says he will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. So it's, again, talking about the elect. Can't get away from that word. Verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass. And someone asked a couple of weeks ago, is there evidence that there will be Bible in tribulation and millennium? And Jesus said in Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. So his words will be here during the tribulation and into the millennium. He said his words will never pass away. So yes, the scriptures will be around. People will have Bibles should they want to consult them during the tribulation, to look up if what these crazy nuts of Christians that I knew said was really true. They sought to see these things happening, and there is going to be, because the words are not going to be passed away. So that's our Matthew 24. and an interesting study when you put together Daniel, Matthew, Thessalonians, and Revelation, plus a few other books. We'll continue to look at more prophecies of Jesus in the New Testament, and that will be the focus of our next Bible study.